Picture your bedroom tonight. Door closed, curtains shut, one person in the bed, maybe two, total silence except for your own breathing, and maybe a phone quietly charging on the nightstand. It's one of the strangest sleeping arrangements in the entire history of our species. For almost all of human history, sleeping alone, in total silence, behind a closed door was rare. Most nights, most people, in most places, slept in a room full of other bodies. In ancient Egyptian households, whole families slept in the same room. In the grand houses of medieval Europe, most of the households spent the night together in the Great Hall, stretched out on blankets and cloaks on the floor. The arrangement had its own quiet order to it. The lord's family usually slept closest to the fire, where it was warmest. Guards and household staff tended to settle nearer the doors, which meant anyone coming in during the night had to get past several sleeping bodies first, whether that was the actual point or just a useful side effect of how the room filled up. A single bed, if there was one, might have nothing more than a curtain pulled around it for privacy, and that curtain was more about blocking drafts than blocking eyes. One documented 19th century Irish family slept in strict birth order across a single bed, mother and daughters on one side, father and sons on the other. Any guest or traveling peddler who showed up got squeezed in wherever there was room left. In many rural pre-industrial homes, it didn't even stop at people. Farm animals were often kept inside the same building overnight, sometimes in the very same room, both for security and because a few extra warm bodies under one roof meant a warmer night for everyone, animal and human alike. This wasn't a sign of poverty alone, though poverty played a real part. Mattresses and fabric were expensive. Houses were small. One large bed for a whole family cost less and took up less space than separate beds for everyone in it. And with no central heating anywhere, packing bodies together kept everyone measurably warmer through a cold night than sleeping apart ever could. It wasn't only families either. Monks in medieval monasteries slept in long, shared dormitories, rows of simple beds under one roof, partly for discipline and partly because a monastery was, in practice, one very large household. Sailors on long voyages slept stacked in hammocks, slung inches apart, swaying together in the same cramped space below deck for months at a time. Soldiers in barracks bunked shoulder to shoulder as a matter of course, long before anyone treated that as unusual or worth commenting on. Most institutions built around large numbers of people sleeping under one roof simply assumed everyone would sleep together. Sharing a bed wasn't the only thing that looks strange to us now. The way people actually slept inside that bed looked different too. For centuries, going back at least to ancient Greece, written records across a dozen languages described two separate sleeps in a single night, not one. People went down for what they called first sleep, not long after dark. Some hours later, they woke up. Not from a nightmare, not from noise. It was just the next expected part of the night. That waking stretch could run anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. People used it. They prayed. They talked quietly with whoever else was awake nearby. They tended a fire that had burned low. Some got up and visited a neighbor a few doors down, wide awake in the middle of the night, and thought nothing of it. Some had sex. Then, when the stretch of wakefulness had run its course, they went back down for second sleep until morning. Nobody wrote about this like it was unusual because it wasn't. It shows up so often in old letters, court records, and medical texts that historians only really noticed the pattern once they started counting the references and realized how many thousands of them there were. Then artificial light showed up, and factory schedules right behind it, and within roughly 2 centuries, the entire two-sleep pattern quietly disappeared from most of the industrialized world. One long block of sleep, uninterrupted, became the expected shape of a night. It's such a recent invention that it barely predates your own great-great-grandparents. So if people were packed into one bed and waking up partway through the night was completely routine anyway, how did anyone get any real rest at all? That's the part modern research on remaining hunter-gatherer groups has started to explain. Researchers studying groups like the Hadza in Tanzania tracked exactly when each person in a sleeping group was actually asleep, minute by minute, across thousands of minutes of overnight recordings. Out of roughly 13,000 total minutes tracked, There were only 18 minutes where every single person was asleep at the same time. On average, close to 40% of the group was awake at any given moment throughout the night. People simply have different natural rhythms, some more alert late at night, some earlier toward dawn, and across a big enough group sleeping together, those differences overlap just enough that someone was almost always at least partly awake, with no one ever assigning a watch schedule or standing deliberate guard. A group sleeping together effectively had a rotating lookout built in for free, without anyone ever deciding to organize one. Some researchers think this is exactly why some people are natural night owls, and others are natural early risers today, a leftover pattern from a time when that variation kept a whole sleeping group covered around the clock. Children slept inside all of this too, usually pressed right up against a parent, not tucked away in a separate room down the hall. That closeness did real work. A sleeping child within arm's reach of an adult had a much lower chance of ever being taken by a predator in the night, benefited from the same shared warmth as everyone else, and settled into a more stable, more regulated sleep, simply from being close enough to feel another person breathing. This is still true today, not just in the past. Across large parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, whole families sharing a room or a bed is a completely ordinary, unremarkable part of daily life, not a hardship and not a quaint historical throwback. Private solo sleep took hold hard in one particular part of the world, in one particular period, then got exported everywhere else as if it had always been the obvious way to do things. So what actually changed in the places where it did change? Why did all of this quietly disappear there? The short answer is cities, money, and religion, arriving at roughly the same time. The Industrial Revolution pulled huge numbers of people into fast-growing cities. Row houses went up quickly and cheaply, and unlike the old, open great halls, they were built with small, separate rooms, each one built for a specific single purpose. One of those purposes, for the first time at real scale, was simply sleeping, and nothing else. Around the same period, a newly wealthy middle class had, for the first time, enough space and money to actually act on a growing belief that people deserved rooms of their own. Personal space stopped being something only the aristocracy could afford, and became something a much larger share of society could actually build into a house. Religion pushed the same direction hard. By the 1830s, a strict, family-focused strain of Christianity had become dominant across much of the industrializing world, and it placed enormous weight on modesty, marriage, and the boundary around a family's private life. Letting a stranger, a servant, or even an old family friend climb into the same bed stopped being ordinary and started being seen as improper. By 1875, one architecture magazine was flatly stating that a bedroom used for anything besides sleep was, in its own words, unwholesome and immoral. Houses changed shape to match the new rule. Georgian homes had been built as a simple run of large rooms, opening directly into each other, no hallway required, because privacy inside the house had never been the point. Victorian houses added something new, a corridor, specifically so a person could walk to their own room without cutting straight through anyone else's. Even married couples split apart. In wealthier Victorian homes, husbands and wives increasingly kept separate bedrooms, sometimes joined only by a single connecting door, each with a dressing room of their own on either side. By the end of the century, a newer generation of women, pushing for more independence inside marriage itself, treated a bedroom of her own as something closer to a right than a luxury. A closed door had quietly become a small, physical piece of personal freedom, not just an architectural fashion. Children felt the same shift. The nursery, a room built specifically to separate a child from the adults of the house overnight, became a fixture of the same wealthier Victorian homes. A child who would once have slept pressed against a parent, one warm body among several, now slept alone, down a hallway, behind a door of their own, often with a nurse checking in rather than a parent lying beside them through the night. What had been the single most protective sleeping arrangement available for a small child, close enough for someone to notice instantly if something was wrong, quietly became the least supervised one, in the name of the same personal space ideal that was reshaping every other room in the house. Which brings us back to your bedroom tonight. Door closed, curtains shut, one person, maybe two, total silence. That arrangement is a recent habit, built by cities, money, and a very particular set of religious values, all landing in roughly the same 2 centuries, in roughly one part of the world. And here's the part that should actually bother you a little. Modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza sleep for about the same stretch of time each night as people in industrialized countries do, sometimes slightly less, typically somewhere between 5.5 and 7 hours. They still wake up repeatedly through the night, the same way people did back when first sleep and second sleep were just called sleep. And across the groups, researchers have studied this, and there isn't even a native word for insomnia. People sleeping in a crowded room, interrupted constantly, surrounded by the sound of other people breathing, somehow aren't lying awake at 3 a.m. worrying about it. People sleeping completely alone, behind a locked door, in total silence, in the quietest and most private sleep arrangement human history has ever produced, are the ones who can't stop staring at the ceiling. Maybe the silence was never actually the upgrade it looks like from here. More of these are coming. On the small, human questions, history books usually skip. Subscribe so the next one finds you.